I think everybody's about filtered in for our special Lunch and Learn session. So welcome everyone. We're very glad you're here. My name is Charles Goode. If you haven't met me, I'm the president of the Tennessee Association of Museums for the special collaboration between TAM as well as the Nashville Zoo, and Bridget Jones will be speaking with you today. So we just want to welcome you here. And before we actually start off with a little more about Bridget, just a special thanks in order, of course, to our friends at the Nashville Zoo. Anybody knows Tori Mason, who works here? She says she misses her favorite people, wishes she could be here. She's recovering from surgery right now, but she is with us in spirit, definitely. And a thank you especially to Debbie Shaw, who is our state coordinator, for helping set all of this up. Roger Torbert, as well as Kelsey White and Aylin Spartman here at the Nashville Zoo. Thank you guys very, very much for all your hard work to get this set up. And Sarah Williams, who is our TAM Professional Programs Chair. So to introduce a little bit about our speaker today, the illustrious Bridget Jones, who will be imparting much wisdom that we can all take to our historic sites. Bridget Jones is the Director of Equitable Partnerships for Bellmead Historic Site and Winery in Nashville, and founder of Bridge Builders Historical Consulting, LLC. Her work includes the preservation and interpretation of the vast social histories of the many diverse cultures that inhabit the state of Tennessee, including but not limited to African American history, Latino history, Middle Eastern history, as well as fostering the types of partnerships with community institutions that will aid in the enhancement of their quality of life. Ms. Jones is a Memphis native and holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the historically black Tennessee State University in Nashville, Tennessee. And in 2019, she gained certification through the National Association of Interpretation and the Smithsonian Institute, National Museum of African American History and Culture, to become an official interpreter of the African American experience. And most recently, she served as curator of social history for the Tennessee State Museum and director of African American Studies for the Bellmead Plantation Museum in Nashville, where her academic focus was primarily on the lasting legacy of American chattel enslavement and on Tennessee in the surrounding areas. So today, Bridget will be adding to the many wonderful things that she already has on her resume by speaking to us today, guiding us through the journey forward, best practices in interpreting Tennessee Black history. And please help me welcome now Ms. Bridget Jones.
Hey y'all! I'm super excited to be here. I see a lot of familiar faces. I see a lot of new faces, and I'm grateful for all of you taking the time out of your day to eat your lunch and listen to me go on and on about why you should talk about Black history and how you can possibly do it better. So with that being said, I'm going to jump right in, and as a Men in Black pastor has said, I won't be before you long. All right, so I'll give you a breakdown of our agenda today so you'll have an idea of exactly what and how we're going to be talking about our topic today. So, of course, I'll do an introduction, which Charles just so wonderfully did for me. We'll have some primary goals to keep us aligned with what we're going to be talking about and in the way we're going to discuss it. And then we're going to discuss integrated versus singular interpretation, because essentially we all do one version of this in some way or another. But we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. And then we're going to go through some examples of what that looks like. So we're going to have 2 examples of integrated and 2 examples of singular interpretation. And then we're going to look at the journey forward. So we're all talking about these issues, but what does it mean to move past just talking about it? Last but not least, what your site can do, and then I'm going to get out of y'all here and let y'all go. So, as he's already told you, my name is Bridget. I work at Bellmead. For those of you who have never been to Bellmead, it is this lovely house that you see here, roughly 10,600 square feet, I believe. At the peak of Bellmead as a property, it was a 5,400 acre plantation. They enslaved roughly 136 people by 1860. That put them in the top 4.5% of slaveholders in the state of Tennessee by 1860. By they, I mean William Giles Harding and his descendants, and his father, John Harding, as well. But what made Bellmead unique was that they didn't have a cash crop. It wasn't a big cash crop plantation. It wasn't cotton, tobacco, sugar cane. They raised horses, not just regular horses, prize, thoroughbred race horses. So when you think about Bellmead in relation to enslavement, that means the lives of the enslaved at Bellmead was a little bit different. They would have been considered skilled laborers per se, because their skill set wasn't the typical skill set of the typical enslaved person. Now, what we did at Bellmead was take the regular interpretation. And eventually that regular interpretation allowed for Journey to Jubilee, uncovering the African American story, to be created. And actually, that story was created by those two people sitting right over there. That's John and Jenny Lamb. I'm always going to shout them out for that. But around 2013, 2014, it turned into a research project. So that was just gathering information. Who were they? What did they do? How did they like it? Did they like it? Just looking at the ideas of what this was in the hard artifacts. And from Journey to Jubilee, we developed a tour called Journey to Jubilee. And from the proceeds of the house tour and Journey to Jubilee and the wine sales and the bourbon sales and the ice cream and the weddings and child, I call Belle Meade Plantation Disneyland. You can do anything at Belle Meade. We are able to do what I call reparative action, and that allows us to support Nashville's Black community. I call them reparative action because it's a wonderful way to say reparations that doesn't scare people, right? So we're able to support Nashville's descendant community through the work that we do at Belle Meade. So the primary goals of our talk today are going to be to analyze how different sites interpret Black history in relation to slavery. Because for y'all to be here today in one way or another, we're all talking about slavery in one way or another. But I think it's always helpful to see how other people are doing it, because sometimes there may be something that you didn't think of, something you may have missed. So we're going to look at how some other sites are doing this work as well. And then we're going to explore examples of ethical interpretation. When I first heard the term ethical interpretation, it kind of went over my head a little bit, because I think that obviously interpretation should be ethical. But there's a method to that madness. It's more than just saying, well, we talked about them. There's a method to how you talk about them and how you talk about their past, their present, and their future. Then we're going to discuss moving the needle forward. It's not just talking about them. What else are we doing to put our money where our mouth is? Then we're going to assess how your site can improve descendant relationships and reimagine your site's programming and interpretation. So first things first, integrated versus singular interpretation. Anybody want to try to tell me, when you think of integrated interpretation, what is that? Jessica. Okay, yes. Anybody else? Oh, yes. Absolutely. Anybody else want to try it? All righty. That is exactly what it is. When we think about integrated interpretation versus singular, the vast majority, especially of plantation museums, they're doing integrated interpretation. So in regards to Black history, that means we're going to tell a story of the owners of this plantation, and we're going to tell a story of the enslaved people. Our goal is to be able to weave these stories together so that it doesn't look like segregated interpretation. Well, you're going to come here and you can hear the Black story, or you can hear the white story. It's all depending upon what you want to hear. The goal is that you get both stories no matter what tour you take. And that way it allows people to see the fullness of your site and not just one aspect of your site. But there are some sites who do singular interpretation. And this can be both negative and positive depending on how you do your interpretation. I went to New Orleans with a couple of my colleagues a couple years back, and we visited a few of the plantations on River Road. And in preparation for that trip, we called down and we were asking, do you guys talk about slavery? And I won't name this plantation, but one in particular told me, oh no, we don't talk about slavery at our site. We didn't want to be redundant. And I was like, was there slavery at your site? And he was like, yeah, but all those sites down the street, they talk about slavery, so you can go to one of those. And I was like, oh, word? I bet. We went to other sites. But then there are some sites that talk about singular interpretation in regards to enslavement that allows for the narrative to be focused on an underserved narrative. So when you go from talking about just the chandeliers and the crown molding to talking about what the institution of slavery did to people for generations, Those are two different types of singular interpretation. So our first example of integrated interpretation is, of course, going to be my favorite, Journey to Jubilee. And in the very early days of Journey to Jubilee, I wasn't there. So when Journey to Jubilee as an actual research project started, I was still an undergrad, y'all. So I came up under Jenny and John. And at that point in time, we had just lots of pictures, lots of artifacts. And we knew some people's names. We knew Susanna Carter. We knew Bob Greene. We knew them from family letters. But there were 136 people enslaved at Belle Meade. You can't just tell the story of 2 people when there was 136 people there. But we had all this information. We didn't always know what to do with it. So then times began to change. The legacy of Journey to Jubilee as a research project and a tour did not happen overnight. And it's not going to happen overnight for any of your sites either. This is a continuous project that's going to involve a lot of people over time. People going to leave, people going to come back, you're going to hire new people because interpretation is always changing based upon the mindsets of the people doing the interpreting. So for Belle Meade, at one point in time, I'd say the beginning of real interpretation on historic sites for Black history kind of starts with Roots. Roots as a book was published in 1976 by Alex Haley. This is one of the first times that a Black person told their story about what it meant to be Black in America from slavery onward. Of course, we have narratives of Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington, but think about it cinematically and in a popular cultural aspect, it was Alex Haley. So then as you push into the 80s and the 90s, you start to see historic sites begin to go, okay, they were here. We'll talk about them a little bit. So I want to point out this article. Black and white relationships on the Belle Meade plantation was written by Ridley Wills, who is a descendant of William Giles Harding. And this article was written in 1991. Fun fact, I was born in 1991. So when I first read, hey, millennials. When I first read this article, it was cringeworthy at best. I was like, ooh, that's a little dated right there. That ain't exactly how I would have said that. And I'm going to point out a specific line for you here. It says, let's see here. The biographical sketch of General William Giles Harding and Professor W.W. Clayton's History of Davidson County, Tennessee, published in 1888, although not entirely accurate, correctly portrays Harding as a kind master. Man, it hurt, didn't it? Yeah, I read it. I was like, what's a kind master? And when I got asked these questions in the time that I was giving the Journey to Jubilee tour, because it was a very common question. Were they good slave owners? And I would always think to myself, well, what do that actually mean, ma'am? And so I would always reply with my own question. Can I come kidnap you from your house, take you to my house, make you live with me, clean my house, but treat you real nice? Does that make me a kind master or a good owner? And you would literally see the wheels begin to turn in people's head like, oh, I am so sorry. That was such a dumb question. And I don't think it's a dumb question. It's just an unaware question. From that article, Belle Meade kept pushing. Ridley went on to do interviews with some of the descendants of Belle Meade. Well, not literal descendants, but descendants on down the line of Belle Meade throughout the 1980s and early 1990s. And those are some of our wonderful primary resources that we have and still use today. But we have to continue to grow. Later on down the line, Belle Meade is going to continue to refurbish his slave cabin. And this is going to go through a bunch of different cycles before we have what we have today. And we just redid it again because your installment, your exhibit, it shouldn't stay the same. As interpretation changes, so should your exhibit. You have some museums, this exhibit is this exhibit. It's going to be this exhibit when this generation see it. It's going to be this exhibit when the next generation see it. And eventually somebody will come and be like, how long has this panel been right here? Maybe we should change that. And that's something that we've been doing for quite some time. And then you push on into deeper programming. This is an article from 2006. Belle Meade is hosting a Juneteenth program. So again, going beyond just the interpretation, going beyond just the exhibit, and actually engaging the community in the history. That's very, very important. Last but not least, this article, which I'm sure Jenny and John remember because y'all are the people that are in this article. In a new project, Belle Meade Plantation excavates its history of slavery and relations between its black and white residents. This is the first article that I heard mention Journey to Jubilee by name. This is when Nashville took notice that Belle Meade was doing something different. And this was kind of what I consider to be the start of it all. Now, when we're thinking about, again, integrated interpretation, that was the start of Belle Meade's integrated interpretation. But somebody else is doing integrated interpretation right now, and I think it's amazing integrated interpretation, and that's going to be James Madison Montpelier. Their exhibit is called The Mere Distinction of Color, which is a quote from James Madison himself. And their exhibit takes you not only into the legacy and lives of the enslaved, but it brings forth a new idea of what that legacy means today. The one thing that they did that I don't see many places is connecting the dots from yesterday to today. Because you have to remember, any issue that we're facing today is only in relation to an issue that we had yesterday. But for some reason at many historic sites, when you start trying to talk about today, it'd be like, oh, wait a minute now. We can't talk about how police brutality is directly tied to slave patrols. Oh no, that's too current. We can't talk about how racism today is directly related to racism and enslavement and Reconstruction and Jim Crow and the crack era and mass incarceration. No, that's too current. We got to keep it siloed. But what they did was connect those dots. I don't cry very often because I do this for a living. But when they connected those dots, it actually hit something in me that I don't get hit often because I saw that they got that this is all interwoven. Last but not least, when we talk about descendant community engagement, they take the cake. They quite literally created the rubric to this work. The Engaging Descendants Community rubric, you can find it online, download it, it's for free. They flew out historians and cultural representatives from across the nation who were experts in this type of work. Flew them to Montpelier, convened them for about a week, and they created the Engaging Descendants Community rubric. And that rubric is wonderful. It will give you step-by-step advice on how to do this work and how to make sure that descendants are not left out of their own story. But raise your hand if you heard about the drama at Montpelier. Yep. I ain't say the work was easy. I just said it needed to be done. What I will say is their agreement was that half of their board had to be made up with descendants. That was an amazing idea upon inception. Do you think the original board was all the way happy with that agreement? Not exactly. So this is where you have to, before you begin this work, acknowledge your unconscious or conscious bias. That's not work that anybody can do for you. That's work that you have to do in your mirror. When you start studying African spirituality, they call it shadow work. You got to be able to look at yourself and say, okay, this is something that I harbor on the inside of myself, whether I want to say it out loud or not. And until you can do that, you're not going to be able to effectively do this type of work because you can't hold bias for people and then try to go ethically interpret their history. Those things don't go together. I'm going to show you a clip of a video from their promo of this exhibit because I thought it was awesome. Oh, it would be helpful if I had internet, wouldn't it? Oh, perfect. There we go. Oh, come on. I will tell you that this did go much smoother in my practice run this morning. when I was on Belle Meade's Wi-Fi. Excuse my many tabs. I live a chaotic life.
Tears stream down my face as I sit here in this jail cell, fearful of what awaits me. My name is Ellen Stewart, and I'm 15 years old, and the law says I'm a slave, the property of Dolly Madison.
I think with Montpelier, we're trying to look at addressing the people who were here and providing as much dignity to their spirits and to their history as we can. It won't be fully restored, we know that, but this is a step in the right direction to tell their story. Their story needs to be told. They weren't invisible. They were someone's great-great-grandmother, great-great-grandfather. It's etched in our DNA. We are them, and they are us.
Now, if you were to ever take the time to actually go visit Montpelier, what I will say is that when you see the clip of them at the Black Lives Matter marches following George Floyd, when you see the clip of them at some of the other Black Lives Matter marches, and you see the images of Trayvon Martin, what you'll begin to understand that separates their interpretation is that they weren't afraid to tell the hard story. The story that makes people genuinely uncomfortable. There was a woman sitting next to me, and I swear to God, she was squirming in her seat the entire time. I'm sitting here in tears, and she looks like if I could leave right now, I would. And that's not a negative feeling. That means that she was in a position of realization. She was hearing a story that maybe she'd heard of, but she'd never heard it from someone who looked like me before. And that's what probably hit her the hardest. So, wonderful, wonderful example. Next up on our list, McLeod Plantation. This one is in Charleston, South Carolina. I love McLeod because what they do good, because everybody has their niche. Belle Meade's niche is creating a new perspective. Montpelier's niche is connecting the dots. McLeod's niche is language. When I got to McLeod and I heard them refer to this plantation as a forced labor camp, as a concentration camp, I was like, oh my God. Because if in that time period, I couldn't have come back to Belle Meade and called Belle Meade a concentration camp. We weren't there yet. We hadn't reached that point. But they understood that language was important because people come to plantations for various reasons. And the vast majority of people just coming to a plantation on summer break, they're not really trying to come to a plantation and feel bad about the fact that they was born white. They came to hear a nice tour, maybe see some antebellum gowns, get a little ice cream, going on about their day. McLeod said, not over here, you ain't. So when you tour McLeod, you understand from the beginning of your tour that this is not a tour that is designed to make you comfortable. This is not your average vacation plantation tour. They said that McLeod Plantation Historic Site is not just a place for memorialization and a place of conscience, but a place where the transformation of conscience can occur. You are going to have to come face to face with your own conscience about the legacy of slavery when you come to McLeod. If you go down there, TripAdvisor reviews, people are mad. I came here because I wanted to hear a story about the owners of this plantation in Sea Island Cotton. What I got was an indictment on white people. You can only be indicted if we're indicting you. This is only an accurate interpretation of the lives of the people who were here. This has nothing to do with you personally. You can only take it personally if you have a personal attachment to the other side of this story. Now, McLeod has, from there, taken their interpretation and broken it down and has created this full-fledged narrative of each and every person that was enslaved on their property. That took a lot of money to create this exhibit. They have each and every one of their slave cabins well preserved. Like you could go inside of them. I believe it's like 8 or 9 of them, which is a lot. We only have one, and it's not even original to our site. So for them to have that many is wonderful. I don't know how many of you may know Joseph McGill, Joe McGill of the Slave Dwelling Project. McLeod is a site that he's done his overnight stay in. And I think that from his work, you can really see, again, connecting those dots. We're not as far removed as we think. So honing in again, language is what McLeod does wonderful. And what Montpelier does wonderful is connecting those dots. But who's next? The Whitney. Has anyone been to the Whitney? Few people? The Whitney was amazing. I went to the Whitney pre-pandemic. So that's when you could get like a real tour. Like you can get a real tour now, but you know, the pre-pandemic America was a whole different ballgame. And my tour guide's name was Ali. The fact that I can remember Ali's name in 2023 from 2019 lets you know how good of a tour guide Ali was. Ali wasn't just interpreting history. Ali was a resident of the same community that this plantation sits in. He is a descendant of the Whitney plantation. This just wasn't a story he was telling. This was personal to him. And I could feel that for the entire hour and a half that I was with him walking on those grounds. And what Whitney does best, what sets them apart, is their singular interpretation. They took everything that Belle Meade is trying to do, what McLeod is trying to do, and what Montpelier is trying to do, and they put all that together and made one big tour. When you go tour the Whitney, the only thing that you're going to hear about the people that own that plantation is that they owned it. It is all for context. But this tour is not about them because there are plantations across America telling the story of rich white people. This plantation is here to tell the stories of the people who were enslaved here. The first thing that caught my attention were these statues. And they're all throughout the plantation. They're called the Children of the Whitney. And they're a representation of those who were children at the time of emancipation. So they represent all of those babies that were running around their plantation in 1865. The next thing that got my attention was this part of the exhibit. Raise your hand if you've heard of the 1811 German Coast Uprising. Okay. If you don't know, the German Coast Uprising was one of the largest slave revolts in America. In 1811, a few of the enslaved people from one of the plantations decided that they were going to rebel and kill everybody on River Road. Of course, they didn't make it all the way through. Their goal was to get to New Orleans and take the capital. They wanted to emulate what had been done in Haiti. That didn't work out in their favor. They were caught, they were captured, and a lot of them were decapitated. And their heads were put on these stakes down the road so that other enslaved people would know, don't you try it. And instead of just telling that story, they depicted it. Do you know how powerful it is to stand in front of a statue of 15 decapitated heads and hear the stories of how certain people decided that those people deserve that for wanting their own freedom? It tells a story of the brutality of slavery. Not only just the brutality of slavery, but the brutality of you deciding that you want to take action against somebody who is taking your freedom from you. War is the story of America. But for some reason, when war works out in this fashion, it's not the same story. I heard a quote one time that says that America should be happy that black people just want equality and not revenge. Any of you watched the show The Hunters? It's a show that just debuted on Amazon. The show is about a Jewish man and his team, and they are going around taking their redemption against all the Nazis that were brought into America via Operation Paperclip. It was a real operation that happened. America really brought in former Nazis and put them in NASA because we were in the Cold War and America wanted to be the first one into space. That really happened. So in The Hunters, they've sensationalized the story that these Jewish descendants of the Holocaust have taken matters into their own hands and they are killing each and every one of these former Nazis. As I was watching season 2 with my fiance the other day, I said, do you know that it would be real interesting if we took this same show idea and flipped it? I guarantee you America would have a heart attack. The entire America. Because we're not used to seeing revenge stories told from the Black perspective. Because for some reason that's taboo. The next thing they do is the Field of Angels Memorial. This honors the 2,200 enslaved children that perished between 1823 and 1863. Louisiana had the highest mortality rate of any slave state in the nation. Because the mosquitoes, the water, malaria, you were guaranteed maybe 7 to 8 years, especially in the early during Spanish Louisiana. Oh, it was real bad. As they're doing rice and water, snake bites, people were dying. And the main people that were dying were babies. So they have a memorial specifically to the babies. That's also powerful. They have these names listed. The research that has been done to craft the Whitney, I couldn't even do it. Because the time that they had to take to do it is honestly just time that you need a whole team. Last but not least, they have went beyond engaging just the descendant community. They've engaged the Black community. This image really struck me. This is Tulane University medical students who decided that they were going to come and show you just how far Black people have come since slavery. These are medical students. Each and every one of them have graduated by now. They're all doctors now. But one of them came on a tour with his daughter, and his daughter said to him in the car, Daddy, so now that you're about to be a doctor, do you think your ancestors would be proud of you? And in that moment, he decided that it wasn't just a story for him to tell. So he told all of his classmates, and they came and took this tour. Engaging the community goes beyond just the descendants because of how slavery worked. So many of us will never know exactly what plantation we came from. So each and every plantation in America is representative of a history that we all share in one way or another, just depending upon what side of the history you sit or stand on. Now, when we talk about moving the needle forward, the way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. It really is the only way. What's done in the dark gonna shine in the light. So for us to be able to reckon with this history, we have to first acknowledge that it exists, and then acknowledge how it affects us individually. And then we can begin to acknowledge how it affects us collectively. But we have to acknowledge it. So what Belmead decided to do was offer a new perspective. Through the Journey to Jubilee tour, our goal ain't to change your mind. It's only to give you a new perspective on how to address this issue, how to think about this issue. Have you ever considered it from my perspective? I know you got your own ideas of race relations in America, but have you ever put yourself in my shoes and looked at it from my perspective, in my direction? So the one thing that we had to try to do first is hire some Black people. Easier said than done as a Black person working on a plantation. Because in most cases, even when I go to my alma mater and say, this is what I do, and this is how I do it, people will applaud for 30 minutes. All right, now who wants to come do it with me? No, ma'am, I'm not going to work on a plantation in 2023. That's all you, baby. And I feel it. I completely understand. But we have to do it. It has to be done because I can't be the only person telling this story. This is a collective Black story. But what I think the issue with many Black people is we have never seen represented in this story. We don't have agency in these stories. When we come to a plantation and we see Jessica taking wedding pictures and Bill over here taking shots, and then I go over here to the slave cabin and I'm about to have a nervous breakdown, where do I see myself in that story? How do I fit in this environment? The issue is that in many cases, we have marketed plantation museums specifically or anything dealing with the antebellum South in a way that is representative of everything but slavery. The fact that you can have people come to a plantation and say, oh yeah, I forgot slavery happened. Well, how else do you think Black people got here? So I think that when you offer these perspectives, you have to be conscious of why Black people don't feel agency in these places, why we don't feel comfortable in these spaces. And then you have to work backwards. How can I make you comfortable? How can I tell stories that you see yourself in? And a lot of times, that's going to mess with your typical interpretation. Eventually, what Belle Meade had to do was go back and rewrite the house tour, because we realized that what we were doing was telling a segregated story. We was telling a white story in the house and a Black story in the slave cabin. And you had people that were coming and saying, well, these are your options. You can take the Journey to Jubilee tour. That's going to tell the story of our enslaved populations. And then we have the house tour, which is going to tell the story of the Hardings and Jacksons. And you have people that would say, well, I'm on vacation. I don't want to hear about slavery. That's not right. Because you need to be able to hear about slavery on every tour that we offer, because slavery permeated every inch of this plantation for as long as slavery existed. For Belle Meade, that's 1807 until 1865. So then we had to make sure that our tours were representative of the people who actually were a part of this story. So we started to reach out to the Black community and say, hey, come take this tour. I reached out to scholars in Nashville and say, hey, come take this tour. Tell me what you think. Because I don't got nobody's PhD, baby. Come help me out. Come tell me what you think about this tour, and I will implement the things that you think academically need to happen for this to be scholarly. And then we engaged the media, because you got to let people know. You got to make people aware that this is happening over here. This isn't something that we're just winging. Word of mouth is only going to take you so far. You have to let people know and put yourself out there. And last but not least, actually engage the community once again, inviting them here. This is free of charge. All I need you to do is show up. Tell me what you think about this. So a couple of Black History months ago, we hosted a descendant story, speaking for them, speaking through us. My goal with that is to engage the college crowd. So I invited all of Nashville's colleges to send their students to say a poem, any poem. Just a poem that is representative of the journey of Black Americans. And some of the poems that those students came and did, especially those of them who came memorized and ready to perform their poem on this plantation, it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And it showed me that what we were doing was actually reaching an audience. It was actually reaching younger people, because history departments across America are dwindling day by day. Because A, it ain't like we do this for the money, right? This is passion-based work. And finding people that are passionate about a story that hurts, that's rare. And then we decided to put our money where our mouth is. History meets activism through reparative action. Yes, you've told the story. Yes, you've acknowledged that it happened. Yes, you've invited the descendants to come and participate. Yes, you've invited the Black community to come and see all the wonderful, magnificent work you are doing. But the truth still remains that slavery is the primary reason that Black Americans live under the poverty line. Slavery is still the majority reason why so many Black people have less than the average white American. I grew up being told that I have to work twice as hard to be considered half as good. What does that say? With that being said, Belle Meade decided that we were going to try to do something to justify, even though we'll never completely justify it, to at least address the issue. The first thing we did was fund a $10,000 annual scholarship to Tennessee State University. That is to go to an incoming freshman who wants to major in history specific to Black American studies. We give that every year. The least we can do is make education attainable, accessible, make studying Black history attainable, accessible. And then what we're going to do is offer you an internship at Belle Meade and a job when you graduate, so that I don't have to continue to be the only person there doing that job. Next up, we work with the actual metro schools. I work specifically with Title I schools, John Early, KIPP, the schools that actually need the help. Because I could go and help, I don't know, what's the big prep school on Harding Pike with the rich kids? Harding Academy and Innsworth and Montgomery Bell. I could go help them. Do they need my help? Absolutely not. Mommy's a doctor, daddy's a politician. They have more than enough help. But what we can do is help the students that are living under the poverty line The students whose parents are working 2 and 3 jobs to get by. But not only do we just help the students, we help the teachers too, because they are underpaid and overworked. So last year we partnered with the Nashville Predators Organization, and they went and served lunch to each and every teacher at John Early Museum Magnet Middle School. We also partnered with John Early again, and I have contacts at Tommy Hilfiger, and we donated a jacket to every single student inside of the school because they needed jackets. It was cold outside. Last but not least, continuing to raise awareness, because this isn't just something that I can do alone. This is something that we as a community have to do together. And the only way to raise awareness is to continue to talk about it. I'm going to talk about this till I'm blue in the face. Y'all be tired of hearing me after a while. But we were able to get it at Afrotech. Afrotech is the largest Black tech conference in the nation. Not only do we go and talk about it, we talk about how we can merge the tech world with the history world. Because tech is the way we're going. And if we don't keep up, we're going to fall behind. These two worlds have to come together. Black history is in every part of this. But how do you talk about making it all work together? And our final step further, we're in the very early conversations of building what we're going to call the Journey to Jubilee Center. This is going to be a building, a research center that is solely focused on further interpretation of the Black American story specific to Tennessee. This will serve as event space, a research facility. We're going to have an ancestry account that we're going to pay for. For if you want to come do your genealogy, come do it on our dime. If you want to host your family reunion, come do it on our dime. Let us help you, because it's beyond us going to say, hey, this is what we got. At this point, we need to ask, how can we help? What can we do? How can we serve you? Because truth be told, Black people serve plantations already. How do we flip that script? So what your site can do, and these are things we've already kind of addressed, evaluate the biases of your staff. Send them with some homework. Ask yourself some hard questions in the mirror. It's okay if you're biased. That's the way of America. We all a little biased. You just got to address what your biases may or may not be. Next up, don't shy away from the hard stories, because they're the stories that need to be told. If you're only telling comfortable stories, nobody is growing when they visit your site. Nobody is leaving here thinking something new, something fresh, something different. Everybody leaving here thinking, well, I mean, they freedom, so they're all right, right? Remember that yesterday's issues are directly related to today's issues. You can't take away from that. For some reason, when we teach Black history, we teach that it happened slavery, emancipation, Martin Luther King, Obama. All is well. No. Remember that all of these things are connected. And then instead of you going to the community and saying, here, this is what we got, take it or leave it, ask, how can we help and what do you need? You can't give what you don't have, but the least that you can do is ask what they need and assess what you can provide. And last but not least, put your money where your mouth is and enact reparative action. Reparative action for your site may not be a scholarship, but reparative action for your site could be buying pumpkins for Robert Churchwell because they're having a pumpkin patch at their school, but they can't afford the buses to take their kids to the pumpkin patch, so they want to do a pumpkin patch at the school so we can provide 20 or 30 pumpkins. It can be, we're going to provide backpacks, school supplies, lunch for your teachers. There's all types of ways that you can do reparative action. You just got to figure out the way that works for your site. So in summary, we have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and the future. If I had $1 for every time some old white man told me, well, the past is the past, we can't change it, and talking about it only going to drive us further apart, I beg to differ. One of the biggest issues that we're drove so far apart is that we've never heard the other side of the story. We've only gotten this side of the story. Now we got to pay attention to this side of the story. And once you hear my side of the story, maybe, just maybe, you'll be able to look and say, I learned something today. Thank y'all so much. All right, questions? Or not. Yes, Bob.
Talk to me a little bit, one of the things that in this discussion, the deeper discussions, is the mental health aspect of the trauma that these stories bring up. And I know that there's, I mean, you know, my very good friend and business partner Richard Josie is really down this path right now talking about it. So, you know, when it comes to that, and I'm not saying like, you know, me shying away from it as an interpreter or as a leader of an institution or anything more, the impact it does have, this story has, as well as, you know, what we all bring to it. You know, from a mental health perspective, which is something I think in the last, that time period between when you went to Whitney and where we are today, we've all been through a grind.
Yeah.
You know, so just curious where your thinking is on that regard at this point, and maybe any suggestions or strategies to employ to ensure that people feel, you know, you're not just opening old wounds, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There.
No, absolutely, great question. One thing that I think that Whitney did, they had a reflection wall where you could go and take, it was essentially an index card, and you could write however you felt about the tour. And of course they're monitoring this so nobody says anything obscene. But you can take a moment and decompress, and they had these little rooms and you can go and write your comment, and you can put that on the wall. And one of the biggest things that I took away was standing there in front of that wall and reading everybody's comment about how they felt about the tour. I also just recently went to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and went to the Greenwood Historic Site Museum that tells the story of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. And they have a specific room that is just dedicated to mental health. So at any point, if this tour makes you uncomfortable, makes you anxious, you can step away and step into this space. And it has some really reflective, powerful quotes and things posted on the wall. There's things that you can listen to, things that you can use to decompress, but will still keep you in the mind that this story is about them. And we're keeping the focus on them. But if you need a minute, take a minute. Well, in the words of a Minute Black pastor, if all hearts and minds are clear, I will let y'all go. Thank you so much for coming out today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.